Dirty moderates, if you are as old as I am, you will remember what I think was the high watermark of the conservative era, the Reagan years. I mean, I was a kid, but I think the Reagan era and the Cold War and all that attended it helped shape my thinking, even though I was raised, as you all know, in a Democratic household. And one of the joys was being able to get to learn and listen about people from the conservative movement in those years, people who I think really are royalty in that world. And of course, with the advent of Trumpism as a scourge and a very destructive force, have become, I guess, never Trumpers and great dissidents from a movement they helped build, they helped inform, and they helped represent. So I am so happy to be joined today by none other than the estimable Mona Charen. Speaking of conservative royalty, hi, Mona.
Hi, Adam. Well, it's very nice to be called royalty.
Well,
maybe not this week so much with all the Sturm and Drang over Kate Middleton. But
oh, that's true. That's true. Where is Kate? Do you know? Do you have any?
Oh, naturally, but I can't reveal it to you, or I'd have to kill you. Yeah.
All right. Mona's being coy at the outset here. No, but I think I wanted to jump right in, Mona, with you because for people who don't know, there was a wonderful show called The Capitol Gang on CNN for many years. The late Bob Novak, it was Al Hunt, Mona, and Mark Shields. Was that right?
Yes, that's right.
And that was kind of one of the early days of the debate show. I mean, not early. I mean, there was the McLaughlin Group, but cable news was not one big hotbed of radioactive hatred in those days. It was a vibrant and I thought intellectually highbrow discussion that I used to love. And,
well, I'm glad.
Yeah. So anyway, but I wanted to jump in with you with the with this New York Times piece you wrote 6 years ago, why I got booted, CPAC it's called. And I just want to start by reading the beginning of it so people know, again, not just who you are, but what we're going to talk about today. All right. Mona writes, I've been a conservative my entire life. I fell hard for William F. Buckley as a teenager, and my first job was as an editorial assistant at Buckley's National Review, followed by stints writing speeches for First Lady Nancy Reagan, and then working for the Gipper himself. Looking toward the 1988 race, Vice President George H.W. Bush wasn't conservative enough for me. I went to work as a speechwriter for Representative Jack Kemp in 1986. So you'd think that the Conservative Political Action Conference, or CPAC, would be a natural fit. It once was. But on Saturday, again, folks, this is 2018, after speaking to this year's gathering, I had to be escorted from the premises by several guards who seemed genuinely concerned for my safety. That happened to me at CPAC is the perfect illustration of the collective experience of a whole swath of conservatives since Donald Trump became the Republican nominee. We built and organized this party, but now we're made to feel, oops, that cut off like outsiders, I think was the last line. I don't remember. But anyway, you got the gist of it. Mona, so I know that the reason I start with this is, nothing's really changed. Matter of fact, it's probably gotten appreciably worse.
No, it's gotten worse. It's gotten much worse. In 2018, you could still say that there was a group, certainly of elected Republicans, sort of a critical mass of people who would stand up to Trump on certain issues, who would resist some of his more lawless or radical or just plain immoral stances. And then since then, we have had the consolidation of the Republican Party into a complete cult for Trump. Dissent is ruthlessly suppressed. And nearly all of the Republican elected officials who dissented have either voluntarily resigned or been defeated. And the people who are replacing them are MAGA. So it is considerably worse than it was in 2018.
Yeah. So, Mona, I want to go back to the beginning, though, just because I think our episode is sort of looking at the conservative movement in your life from 30,000 feet, if we can. So where were you born? How did you kind of come to sort of conservative principles before we even get into speaking of royalty, working for the Reagans? Where did this all start? I mean, what's your origin story, as it were?
I was born in New York City, but my life was affected by international events right from the beginning.
Okay.
Because the year that I was born, I'm not shy, the year I was born was 1957. And that was the year of Sputnik.
Sputnik, right.
And because of Sputnik, for our younger listeners, Sputnik was the Russians put up a satellite, and they weren't supposed to be that technologically sophisticated. And this put a terrible scare into the United States and the West. And so there was a huge impetus to invest in science education and science training in the United States. And so my dad was able to get his PhD in physics thanks to the National Science Foundation grant that he received early in my life. And so the whole family went out to the University of Colorado. And my earliest memories are actually of snowy Boulder, Colorado. And then we moved back, not to New York, but to New Jersey, where I mostly grew up. And even though I grew up in a very liberal environment, New Jersey is a, pretty blue. Nowadays we would say it's a blue state, and it was then a liberal state. And but I was a contrarian and became very interested in conservatism.
Right. For those also that don't know, to Mona's point about Sputnik and everything to do with the space race, that was a huge part of the centerpiece of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. For people who don't quite understand what NASA was doing or whatever, it was all part of that. But okay, so from there, I know you went to Columbia, right?
Mm-hmm.
Columbia University. And did you study political science?
No, I studied history. For better or worse, I thought that political science wasn't a serious discipline.
Really? My God. Political theory was my undergrad. American studies was my master. Do you look down on them? I'm joking.
No, you're absolutely right. And I was completely wrong. And if I had it to do over again, I actually think I might have studied political philosophy instead of history. Although I don't regret it. I don't regret it because,
in grad school, the history department was very, the academics there did think that they were, above it all, superior to the other discipline. They did. I mean, they were wonderful, but they just felt history is the discipline by which the portal, which gives you the insight.
Entree to everything else. That was what I thought. And so I did get a fantastic undergrad education, and still think back on it fondly. And then I got a law degree, and which I never used, but I did get it. Yeah. And and then I wound up in the Reagan White House.
Okay, but that's a big step. I mean, first you ended up as a speechwriter for Nancy Reagan. I mean, now talk about heady times, huh? So
it really was
this in the first term? When was this?
Yes, it was in the first term. It was the summer of 1984.
Right.
And so Reagan was running for re-election at this point. And
49 states, right?
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Look, you don't have to thank me. It's all right.
Well, I commented on a recent one of among the sort of everything is absurd, but that Trump was at a rally in Dayton, as you know, over the weekend. And he said, my rallies, Reagan never had my rallies. Reagan was never as popular as me. I just tweeted, Ronald Reagan was reelected with 49 states. You traitor, one-term loser. I didn't even say that part, but anyway, so I control myself sometimes. All right, anyway, go on. Yeah.
So Nancy Reagan needed a speechwriter for the campaign because she was doing a lot more public speaking. So I flew around the country with her and wrote speeches for her, and then when the campaign was over successfully, I switched over to the president's staff. So yeah.
And then it was fantastic time. So you were there. Wow. I mean, they were like Michael Deaver, Peggy Noonan, all these people.
Michael Deaver hired me. Yeah.
He was basically Reagan's media man, kind of. Is that what he was?
He was. He had kind of a mixed reputation at the time. People thought anyway, but he was a master at visuals. He could, he knew how to set up backdrops. Remember that speech that Reagan gave with the Statue of Liberty in the background? I mean, that was Michael Deaver's genius.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it's interesting. I recently, apropos of nothing, though I'd love to have her on, I reread What I Saw at the Revolution by Peggy Noonan, which I hadn't read in a long time. I mean, it certainly didn't read it when it was out, but I might have read it in the 90s. And the reason I bring it up is that I get all very misty-eyed. Not so much because I was certainly no foot soldier in that revolution, but her love of democracy, the love of America that exuded from that, the belief that, after Watergate in Vietnam and the Carter malaise, that the country could rebound and the country could believe in itself, and we were sort of back again,
Yes.
And the way she wrote it, and she writes so beautifully, and I am admittedly a sentimental person, but I was so moved by the way she described it. And I say that to say that conservatism always, has had obviously a mixed reputation historically, but certainly in my lifetime, if you think of, Jack Kemp, which we're going to talk about in a second, but Ronald Reagan, even H.W. Bush, even George W. Bush, there's a sunniness to it, sort of look toward the sun of saying, hey, we don't hate people as you guys may think. We're not trying to throw the poor in the river. We just see America as inherently a place of promise. And we think the marketplace can do a lot of these things better. We believe in the same ideals, but, we're suspicious of state power, and we believe in an American role abroad for good. And again, some of this is rooted in Wilson and Roosevelt and Truman.
That's
too.
correct.
So,
Very
but now,
well said.
Thank you. But now we're in this horrible, noxious world of authoritarianism, angry populism. I mean, populism, I guess, is always angry, but a really awful and a kind of restively destructive populism. And we're not looking toward the sun. I mean, America is a third world nation. According to Trump, it's a failing nation. I mean, he's always said that. And I'm interested in your take. I mean, in your analysis, because we've all been watching this for a long time. But now that the last couple of years, I've had my own forum to really dive in it with people like you. Why has the Republican Party, and by a certain extent, what used to be conservatism, turned so inward? What? I know that's a broad question, but it's
it's an excellent question, and it deserves a lot of careful thought. Because honestly, what has happened to conservatism in my lifetime, in the recent past, is a tragedy in my opinion, and it's really important to try to dig down and understand it. So the first thing that I would say is that we have to look at the defining conflict that created modern conservatism. And that was the fight against the USSR and the communist world in general. Okay. That was the unifying glue that held together what used to be called the three-legged stool of the Republican Party, which was, sort of foreign policy hawks, social conservatives, and economic conservatives. And they may not have had a whole lot in common among themselves, except that they agreed that there was sort of a global contest between the ideas of the collectivists and the authoritarian communist world and the free market, liberty, freedom of religion West. And when the Cold War was won and no longer the defining issue, you already began to see on the right those attachments among conservatives begin to fray. And one of the earliest signs of it was my old friend, who's no longer a friend because of where he went with this, but I was very close to him in my years in the Reagan administration. That was Pat Buchanan.
Oh, wow.
Pat Buchanan. Wow.
Well, he's a whole novel, Pat Buchanan.
That's right. But he was a harbinger of what was going to happen. I mean, he was Trump before Trump. And he became very, very dubious about American world leadership if it wasn't going to be against communism. He did not necessarily care about standing up for democracies. He was not interested in that. He became very protectionist. Whereas Reagan had always been for free trade, and he became very hostile to immigration, which of course is the issue that Trump rode and continues to ride. So the winning the Cold War turned out to be a death knell for the kind of conservatism that I grew up in and that I think was very, very healthy for this country. And it was replaced by this darker, more nativist kind of right-wingism. But I have to say, in order to understand it fully, you have to also remember that this conservatism we are seeing now has deep roots in the American past. That before Reagan, conservatism was not so sunny. And there were plenty.
Yeah, I said in my life that yes, I was not there
right?
for Father Coughlin and
yeah, exactly.
you know, and for that crowd, right?
Exactly. And of course, there was the strong isolationism of the 1930s that characterized the Republican Party. And conservatism. There was a lot of racism. Of course, there was plenty of racism in the Democratic Party too. In fact, more because all of the old Southern conservatives were Democrats. But but there were all of these strains of nativism that go back, that have deep roots in American history, and we've had recurrent battles in our history. About immigration, for example, where, you know, there's always been a sense of, you know, the other, and that these, you name it, these Germans, these Irish, these Italians, these Jews, these whatevers who are coming in don't share our values. They're not like us. They're going to poison the blood, although most don't use quite that level of incendiary rhetoric. But yeah,
I mean, you know, that's the Buchanan thing. That's worth unpacking, because when Trump was running in 2016, there were some smart pieces written about that. You know, people obviously in a different era, in the sunny era, conservatism, you know, we're not taking any of that seriously, though famously Pat Buchanan ran against George H.W. Bush in New Hampshire in 92, you know, imperiling him for the general and showing that there was a part of the coalition in the first election since the Cold War that was going to be wobblier, right? And had previously existed. And then, of course, he ran in 96 as like Pitchfork Pat or something like that. You know, I know we're both Jewish, you know, accusations of anti-Semitism long dogged him. I mean, Wayne F. Buckley wrote that famous In Defense of Anti-Semitism, In Search of Anti-Semitism, excuse me, not defense, where he took on Joe Sabran and then Buchanan and said he found it impossible to defend him against the charges when he was making these cracks about going into the Gulf War because of Israel and a bunch of stuff. Buchanan did all of that, you know, the isolationism. Again, for those that don't know, he was a Nixon speechwriter with Ray Price, and then he ended up in the Reagan communications department. You know, he was I don't know, pre-Vatican II Catholic or something.
Very much so. But you know, he was also before he was any of those things. Well, after he was a Nixon speechwriter, he was a regular on the chat shows. He was a columnist, and he was a regular on the McLaughlin Group and other shows. So people were very, very familiar with him. That was why he was able to jump into politics. Just the TV shows were a springboard for his political career.
It's interesting because back to the Buchanan point, when he was on those shows, and I used to watch them religiously, he had this thing, this I'm going to ask you about, where he would say things that were impolitic, you know, and he could kind of get away with the things now that Trump mainstream, that he mainlined into the blood veins of the party. And then he would do this laugh. He'd have this kind of, hearty laugh, sort of like, I guess the guy's not that bad. You knew him. I'm not asking you to impugn his character, but what about all the accusations about him not being crazy about Jews and maybe being a descendant of an earlier, less sunny right-wing time?
So I have such mixed feelings about Pat Buchanan, because I did work with him. And that laugh was something that I enjoyed on a daily basis when we worked together.
It used to make me breathe, because I go, well, he's actually laughing at himself. How bad could he be? It turns out a lot of autocrats laughed at themselves. But
no, that's right. No, it's true. So he had a great sense of humor. He was a great raconteur. He and I got along like a house of fire.
Very bright.
Loved the guy. Very bright.
Yep.
But he turned darker. And his father was an anti-Semite and an America Firster avant la lettre.
Like Bill Buckley's father.
like Bill Buckley's father, exactly.
Right.
And Buchanan, again, after the Cold War, he was picking up on those themes, and the first signal was when he became kind of anti-Semitic, and he started. As I'm sure you remember Fred Barnes, who was another, so
Sure.
Fred was friendly with Pat too. And Fred wrote at the time so Pat Buchanan began to show this dark side by coming to the defense of accused Nazi war criminals.
Yeah, Demjanjuk, right? The whole
Demjanjuk and
Demjanjuk
one other.
else.
Yeah. And what Fred Barnes wrote was, who's not Jewish, but he said, there are a lot of people wrongly accused in this world and who could use an advocate. And it's funny that Pat chose to be the advocate for these guys, Yeah.
Why was he doing? Well, I remember the liberal, and I'm sure you know well, Michael Kinsley, who used to be on, who, when a lot of these accusations were being hurled. I remember I read a lot of this later on. I read it like in the mid to late 90s after it happened, going back to books and columns and Buckley's book. Kinsley said he's not an anti-Semite, but again, it's hard sometimes, the people say, don't meet your heroes. I used to say, don't meet your villains sometimes because you might like them. They can be utterly charming. I mean, apparently Goebbels was very charming. I mean, that's what was said. Who knew? I mean, it's just so, that doesn't, not to say that.
No, that's true. So, I mean, I have to say he was probably, and again, nobody is either good nor bad, all good or all bad.
Right.
And Pat Buchanan had his moments where he was definitely not anti-Semitic, but then he allowed that to rise within him later. So,
and I all of this is to say it's a great segue for us because it was said in the early 80s, and I might have been Pat Moynihan, that the conservative movement in the Republican Party was the party of ideas, right?
That's
it was the idea that the belief that there were new ways to do things there were new ways to do old things, but with a kind of innovative edge, and to really rethink education policy and obviously certainly
anti-poverty policy,
that there might be an antidote or a corrective, maybe is a better word, to the Great Society, and despite liberal characterizations of it, that would be effective, humane, and smart. Maybe a precursor to compassionate conservatism.
Correct.
You could probably put that together, which brings us to Jack Kemp, who you work for, who I adored with every fiber of my being. I thought he was wonderful. And he obviously worked for him. And of course, he was the 1996 Republican vice presidential nominee with Bob Dole. That ticket didn't have much of a chance, but still. Talk about, because I bring this up as a contra Pat Buchanan. I mean, talk about looking to the sun. Look about a guy who had such a inclusive, you might even say ecumenical conservatism. I don't even mean that in a religious sense, just ideologically. I mean, what a hell of a guy. From all I knew, I didn't know him, but
I knew Jack, of course, because I worked for him. I knew Jack very well. And this is an example of somebody who really does not disappoint upon close knowledge. He was a great idealist.
Yeah.
He wanted, he was a deep patriot. He was anti-Soviet and anti-fascist.
Yep.
And, he believed in human dignity for everyone. He wanted to improve the lives of Black inner city residents, and he wanted to go into the barrios and help people who were Hispanic. And he was pro-Israel, and he was, and he was a deep believer in, the importance of free markets and free enterprise, maybe a little bit naively at some points where he thought it was kind of the solution, where things were sometimes a little bit more complicated, but he had a joyfulness about the way he did politics and the way he did life. And he was a great man and a great American.
Yeah, I mean, and that idea that he was, at least when it came to race, a true Lincoln Republican,
That's right. Absolutely.
And, believed in that, rising tide lifts all boats theory. And you're right, the empowerment zones, and really believing that, hey, we do care, he did at least, about, about the inner city and about the underclass and urban blight, but we're just doing it wrong. Although he wasn't a balanced budget guy. He wasn't the guy. He said, let's just cut taxes. He wasn't.
I know. He thought that it would generate so much economic activity that would help with budget deficits. By the way, can I tell a quick personal story about this? So I worked for Jack in 87, and it was in 96 that he was so when Dole was getting the nomination. So by then I was an established columnist.
Right.
And Jack and I occasionally would be in touch, but not that often. But I wrote a column after it was clear that Dole was going to be the nominee, recommending that he choose Jack Kemp as his VP.
And they were not friends. Right?
No. Oh, no. They were on opposite sides because Bob Dole was blue eye shades, balanced budgets, that
whole Midwestern conservatism, right?
Exactly. And Jack Kemp was the buoyant, we're going to have tax cuts for everybody and it's going to, be fantastic. And it's supply side economics. And anyway, so when Dole picked him, Jack, this is before the days of, texting and all that. The communication was slower then, but Jack clipped out of the local newspaper, wherever he was, a copy of my column recommending that Dole pick Kemp. And he wrote on top of it in marker, he said, "Dole read your column!" !
Wow.
Dole picked him.
Oh, that's well. Sweet. Listen, I mean, you had been part of that movement. I know Kemp ran in 88, right? And did not.
That's right.
Obviously, the nominee was George H.W. Bush, who obviously went on to beat Michael Dukakis. Did Kemp? So after he was housing secretary for Bush 41, which is what he then did, he was really with Empower America. He was a speaker with Bill Bennett and Gene Kirkpatrick, other conservative luminaries. And then did he do anything else in public office after that point, or no? He spent the rest of his time kind of in a think tank, right?
Yeah, right. And then unfortunately he got cancer young and died. So that was very sad.
That was sad. Did in terms of the GOP, right? Because here we are, speaking of ideas, at an election where I'm assuming, like me, I mean, I'm an independent, okay, but I have certainly plenty of conservative principles. But there's no way I'm voting for Donald Trump. So it's Biden or bust, and I think that there's an ability to have a conversation, which I'd like to have with you, that can be critical of Biden administration policies without saying that we've created a glide path to fascism. I mean, I understand why. I mean, I'm all team Biden. We're all, we're part of this uneasy coalition, all of us, so Trump doesn't get a second term. But what do you think about where we are now in America, apart from Trump? I mean, in terms of, the Biden administration's policies and the things that have been done. I mean, are you finding yourself, is your little FDR heart beating over this? Or are you just in opposition to most of it, but you can't vote for Trump? Is that where you are?
No, I'm in the middle.
Okay.
On the one hand, I think that Biden has been a good president in several ways.
Okay.
One is he has shown great courage and principled leadership on foreign policy.
Yeah, he's been Reaganite. He's been Reaganite on it. Yeah.
With the exception of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which I thought was a botch. But his leadership on Ukraine, again, you can quibble. I do quibble about the way he did it. He's a little too slow, a little too cautious, about sending them the weapons that they need. And we would keep saying, well, we're not sure about this weapon system or the HIMARS. No. And then we'd say yes. And, F-16s, no. Then we'd say yes. Tanks, no. Then we'd say yes. So that could have been done better. But that much having been said, he did unify NATO. He presided over the expansion of NATO. He was very clear about, we've given more to Ukraine militarily than any other individual country. And that is, I think, as you say, it's Reaganite. It's standing up for a traditional view of America's role in the world, which is to defend democracies when they are attacked, and Biden has been very good on that. I thought he was excellent on Israel.
Yeah, me too.
Well,
he's always been a Zionist. That's always been.
Yes. And
he's the old school Democratic Party and the Kishka.
But he even went above and beyond. I mean, he went there. Yeah. He went to Israel after October 7th, which was a beautiful act. Yeah. So I give him tremendous credit for that. Yeah. And I do not mind his criticisms of Netanyahu, because I think Netanyahu is a disaster.
Right.
So I think it's fair for him to criticize Netanyahu, and I don't hold that against Biden at all.
No.
So I think on those things he's been terrific. I
mean, if you had been a legislator, would you have been a yes vote on infrastructure, chips and science? No.
Oh, the infrastructure bill.
Yes.
Yeah, that was. I mean, you could quibble about aspects of it, but yes, I would have voted for the infrastructure bill. I do not agree with a lot of Biden's approach to other matters.
Right.
I have a much more, so for example, some of the, and by the way, this is a funny situation to be in, because my critique of Biden comes from my conservative principles. So for example, I resist his calls to these, to protectionism. He's constantly saying we're going to buy American, it's all going to be built in America. And by the way, that's the same thing that Trump says.
Right.
And so,
well, he's not calling for 100% tariff on Mexican built cars, which is just a tax increase. All tariff is, but
it's exactly, it's a tax increase. And so it's funny, one of the things that I criticize Biden about it from the right as a conservative, it's even worse among the MAGAs. But okay, so I'm not a protectionist. Biden is, so I disagree with that. I disagree with his sort of how shall I put this? His unmitigated support for universal pre-K. I'm dubious about that. I have looked at the research and it's very mixed, including in places like Tennessee, where they instituted it across the state, and the outcomes are not good.
Right.
And I'm much more inclined to say, give the money to the parents and let them decide how best, and so I have different approaches to a lot of things. Than Democrats and then President Biden. But of course, what's coming. It's, Biden is
America or Trump. You can't have both.
That's it. And, and by the way, Biden is not, I wrote a column critical of John Lehman yesterday, because John Lehman was Reagan's Navy secretary. Mm-hmm. And he wrote this piece for the Wall Street Journal saying why he, thought that Trump, that Reagan could never vote for Trump, he said, but he wouldn't have voted for Biden either. And at his final paragraph, he claims that Biden has turned over his agenda to Bernie Sanders, which is preposterous. It's just ridiculous.
I know, that's ridiculous. Well, that's where you get, that's where in the movement of people, and there have been, thankfully there's a big Never Trumper movement, which I find myself at, Joe Walsh and the old guy, Steve Schmidt, there's a whole bunch of you people, you folks who have been in Republican politics or the conservative movement for a long time, who know what a threat Trump is. My thing is two things. First of all, perfect isn't on the menu. I'm not the only one to say this. So this is not a buffet where you get to, I'm going to have the tomato and I'm going to have not the roast beef, but the cut duck or, anyway, instead of an egg, get over it. Okay.
Yeah.
This is what you get. There's no a la carte choices. But number two, if you believe that Trump is a true threat, you only have one viable alternative. And you don't have to agree. The other thing that we didn't used to have in politics, and I always say this about growing up, and my grandfather was a prominent judge in Miami who helped get Lawton Chiles elected and Bob Graham elected. I worked for Bob Graham in the Senate. He was an old school Democrat. We did not sit around the dinner table. Again, different world, different media ecosphere, blasting every single thing Ronald Reagan or George Bush did, or anyone that we knew. And we knew tons of people who voted Republican, and they were not our enemy. People are not your enemy. Okay. That's come out of MAGA. And I would argue out of the far left. this idea that you have to the point of Lehman, you don't have to agree with Biden, as you and I don't on several domestic or economic industrial things. But we know overall he's been a good steward in the post-Trump, post-electoral Trump era to get us through COVID, to do things. I think he's tried to do his best. Certainly, I agree with you 100% internationally. And you think, what are these people doing when they write that? You know what I mean? Hey, you don't want to vote for Trump, but then write an article saying that you don't think Trump is a threat and you're going to vote for Bobby Kennedy or something. I mean, don't say that we're at water's edge, but I'm not going to vote for Biden because I disagree with his
the student loan thing.
Energy or something. That's just, policy is so subordinate to the idea of a nearly 2.5 century old American experiment almost on its knees. These things are not this, they're not equivalent. We do that on the show here. I say this, guys, never Trump means never Trump. That's what it means. Not never Trump on Tuesday, but on Friday I get upset at the Democrat. I used to be, I left the Democrats over the squad and all that stuff. I hate identity politics. It makes me sick. I for sure believe in limited government. I think the economy would move better if we deregulate and cut taxes, even if with deficits. We would do better. But hey, I'm not in charge. But I can live with certain policies I disagree. Liz Cheney said you can live with bad policies, but you can't live with Trump.
That's it.
So to me, I find that things that like a Lehman, all that, I don't know whether he's a weenie or it's a joke or a lie. I don't know. I don't know the guy. But what, I never understand that position because we're just not in that. We're not in that climate anymore. I wish we were.
As my friend Brett Stevens put it a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, he said, talking about the choice between Biden and Trump, he said, I can survive if Biden raises my taxes.
Sure.
I can't survive if Trump takes away my liberties.
Yeah, that's right. And so how real, let's get into the horse race of it all. How real do you feel, or how serious do you take swing? There's only 6 states that matter, 6 or 7 maybe. So I don't care about national polls. But when you see these real clear politics averages in Michigan and Arizona and places, I mean, Trump is in many cases 3 to 5 points ahead, 2 points. That doesn't matter. Sometimes out of the margin of error, but
yeah.
The bottom line is Biden, even when he's running ahead, and I said this in 2016, I was shocked in the end that Hillary lost, but I never saw a poll but for after the 2016 Democratic Convention where she really had more than a 5-point lead. And I kept saying, this guy's a fucking joke. Excuse me, we curse here. We're allowed to. How is it possible that she's not doing better? Well, Biden's doing worse in the polls. So I know polls are fungible and data has become hard to read.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I don't discount the polls, and I get really concerned.
I'm talking about swing state polls. I don't care about.
No, I know, I am too. But I'll tell you something that worries me is when I see stories such as the one last week where who was it? It was Evan Osnos had a piece where he was talking about the top Biden people who were saying that the polls don't capture people with, who have cell phones and most people don't have landlines anymore. And that's why the polls are inaccurate. And I thought, oh my God, if they really are telling themselves that, that's worrying because of course, pollsters have long since compensated for people having only cell phones and not landlines.
There are really a lot of amazing, and Mona, you've been doing this longer than me, but I'm proud of my investment in time as a student and now being a voice in this world. There are some really stupid takes. Sometimes I read stuff in high and you go, what are you talking about? But I do think people just go to the same cocktail parties. I used to be a Broadway producer in my first life. And people in the theater would all talk about the show. And you'd be like, but you're not doing a commercial show that anybody wants to see. It's the same kind of thing. What's that old story of, I think it's attributed to Pauline Kael in 72. I don't know anybody that voted for Nixon. How could he have won?
Yes.
He won 49 states. Also, like, well, it's because you don't know anybody outside of Washington and Boston, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
The lanes on every side. So
yes. No, precisely. So that's worrying when people discount, especially people who need to be aware, like the Biden circle, about the fact that the polls have not really been wrong. The polls have been right. They've been within a margin of error, but the polls have been right for the last several elections running. Even in 2022, people said, oh, remember the big red wave that was supposed to be happening? It wasn't the pollsters who predicted a red wave. It was the Republicans who kept shouting that there was going to be a red wave, and it didn't materialize.
And let it be known, we did election night coverage here. I was so glad that Doug Mastriano didn't win, or Mehmet Oz. But was in a go look at the results. We can all say, hey, the normalcy brigade won by a half a point less, and these were
I know
Josh Shapiro won big for governor, but many of the other crazies, Kerry Lake came so close. They came close.
It's
so
in a
again,
better world that would not be true.
Yeah, is this the year they tip because maybe people are in such a foul mood that they say we're going in the wrong direction? They don't care about what kind of recovery we're in. I don't know.
Though, so there's a lot to unpack. First of all, in a better world, Trump would be at 3%.
Yeah,
not where he is.
Nikki Haley would have been the nominee probably.
Yeah,
in a Reagan world.
Yeah, because he is utterly unfit and a dangerous, as Dick Cheney said, the most dangerous figure in 256 years of American history. So yeah, that is the reality. Okay, now there are a few things that we have to focus on.
Okay,
one is that polarization is so strong these days that it isn't possible, perhaps, for anybody to get the kinds of majorities of approval that used to be normal for presidents. So we have to assume that, for example, we know that partisanship affects people's views about the economy. When Republicans will say that when a Republican is in the White House, the economy is great. And when a Democrat is in the White House, the economy is terrible, and vice versa. So those things have changed. Polarization has begun to poison people's views about things to a significant degree. But you're right. The election will not be chosen. It will be decided by swing voters in a few key states. The economy is actually doing very well, except for inflation, which has been,
which is very real for
which is very real, and it's the first time in 40 years that Americans have experienced inflation like this. And the people who are experiencing it, most of them have never experienced it. Most of them are younger, than say 60, and so they haven't seen it, and so they are very angry about that. And but as things improve, so wages have, for the last 6 to 9 months, wage increases have been outpacing inflation, but that's a lagging indicator, and it takes a while for voters to assimilate that knowledge and that good feeling about their pocketbooks. It may happen in the next 8 months, not a guarantee, but it may happen. And if it does, then people might be a little less dissatisfied with Biden. We have to hope so, because prices never come down.
No,
they never come down.
That is not articulated well at all. I mean, I think I know they were trying Bidenomics, and the Democrats with messaging, as you know, they've never been the unification crowd with messaging. No. But you go, well, inflation's come down, and whatever. Okay, but prices haven't.
Right.
And saying that to people who are struggling at the grocery store, to give Bill Clinton credit, he was my first vote. I used to be a Bill Clinton Democrat. Clinton would say, yeah, things aren't bad. Things aren't well, but I feel your pain. Yeah. I know what it's like to be poor in Arkansas, and I'm going to go there. Most other Democrats do. Well, what do you mean? Why do you say that? Things are great. Don't you read the Washington Post? No, they don't. And you know what? People aren't thinking at all about democracy in any kind of macro sense. They're thinking about, how am I going to pay my bills? My credit card's maxed out. This is real stuff, and it's brass tacks, and it's not. They've had a terrible time, the Biden team, to figure out how to do it. When they get nervous, as you notice, the surrogates, and I have them on, they go into, there's a rural white movement. I say, okay, guys, stop, maligning half the country. Focus on what you did and what you can do better, how you can sell it, right? Because I actually think all presidential elections are referenda on the incumbent.
Maybe not this year.
I hope you're right.
Maybe not this year.
How about a referendum on the previous incumbent?
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing. I mean, that will determine the outcome. If it's a referendum on Biden, Biden will lose. If it's a referendum on Trump, Trump will lose, because both of them are deeply unpopular, and it's just a matter of who's less unpopular or more unpopular. Okay, so this brings me to my final point, which is that there is a species of amnesia about the nature of Trump that is out there. I think when he is,
which is so worrisome.
It's so worrisome, but it's not. Yeah. I mean, it's not likely to survive the next several months as the campaign gears up. Biden has begun his campaign. He's starting to run ads. He is vastly better resourced than Trump. He's not getting any younger. Obviously, that needs to be said. You know, it's a reality.
You have to lean into that. You can't change.
Yeah, right. You hang a lantern on it. You make jokes about it. He's starting to do that. You show that you're vigorous, as he did at the State of the Union, and so on. And people will realize that the Republicans have oversold the age thing a little bit. They've convinced lots of voters that Biden is not just old, but utterly senile and decrepit, and that is not true. And so, Biden can't convince people he's young, but he can convince people he's not senile. So that, I think, might have been a bit of an overreach by the Republicans that they may yet be sorry for. And finally, people will have their noses rubbed in the nature of Trump again. And every time Trump has been in front of their faces, a significant number of voters have said, no, stiff-armed. I just can't deal with it. And so we just have to pray. And we also have to pray that enough people, which is why I took off after John Lehman yesterday, we have to also pray that a number of people who will not vote for Trump will not do the stupid and self-indulgent thing of choosing a no labels candidate, who, by the way, they don't even have a candidate, or a third party choice in order to say, well, I just couldn't vote for, they're both terrible, so I went third party. If you go third party, you are making it that much more likely that Trump could get back into the White House, and that is a catastrophic outcome for this country. And nobody should indulge the idea of a third party. We need to keep the anti-Trump coalition together, which means voting for Biden. Doesn't mean you're permanently a Democrat. Doesn't mean you have to, it just means for this emergency, this is the only way.
Yeah, a broad-based coalition. I mean, you did see essentially what we might call the McCain-Romney vote in that what was once the McCain-Romney vote in 2020 break for Biden, just by enough to win him Pennsylvania, Michigan,
That's correct.
Yes. And that was at Arizona, Pima County, right? And outside Detroit, and Atlanta, all those new suburbs that have gotten bluer or who are purple, which are purple. I don't know about this year. Mike Madrid's a friend of the show, and he breaks down a lot of the data. He said the fundamentals favor Biden, and he's going to come on again. The issue, though, is, again, not the ideological divide even. It's that the Republicans are the non-college educated party, attracting working class people of all races, not just white people. And of course, Biden and the Democrats are going to win the African-American vote and the majority of the Latino vote. But how much are they going to lose of it is the question. So sometimes in the media, we get the black vote's the black vote's not going for Trump. They haven't gone for Republicans since Eisenhower or something. But the point is
Biden did better among whites than Hillary Clinton did.
I know.
And that is something that Biden has. There's been a lot of focus recently that he's losing blacks and Hispanics, but he's also losing whites and especially whites without, as you say, without a college degree. That's worrying.
It is. And I think
it's all men, not women.
No, it's men too. It's black men too. Black
Hispanic men. Yes.
But Mike Madrid, who's obviously a long time in Republican politics, and I'm just using him because he's not the only person that says this, is that if you are a Latino worker if you're a male Latino in the working class and you're working at a factory and all you hear is, well, we're getting rid of this because we're going to have green energy, why would you vote for those people? Even instead of them saying, hey, we're going to help you we need to invest in green energy, but you got your job for now. We're here for you. A lot of this is rhetorical, but it matters. And it is the sense of people.
I'm not sure I
You're not
buy that.
convinced?
I'm
No?
not convinced of that. No, because unemployment is at its lowest rate that it's been in something like 50 years. I mean, we don't have a jobs problem in this country, and people are not losing jobs because of the green energy programs. People have more job opportunities than they've had in a very long time. So I don't really think it's that. I think it's much more what we were discussing earlier, that their dollar doesn't go as far as it did.
That's the fundamental thing.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, which is like a tax, right?
It is.
Like it's a hidden tax. So, Mona, what do you think? What viable future is there for a kind of center right? I always like to say an American Tory party, just to simplify it. Is such a thing possible? I mean, after 24, assuming Trump loses, like, I'm politically homeless. That's sort of the foundation of this podcast. I'm not comfortable in the Democratic Party. I'm certainly not in the Republican Party of today. So where do you, me, and all these people go? Are we just going to be nomads or Bedouins?
No, I do. So I feel the same way. I feel homeless. And so my feeling about this is that you don't, like the no labels people, you don't snap your fingers and create a centrist party at the presidential level in 1 year, which is what they're trying to do. Yeah. If you want to build a new party, it's got to be a grassroots effort. It has to start from the bottom and percolate up. So looking forward, am very interested in certain kinds of electoral reforms, like experimenting with nonpartisan primaries.
Yeah, I agree.
I think our primary system has been increasing our polarization to a ridiculous degree. Yeah. Only the most extreme voters choose the candidates, and there are ways to reform that with a combination of nonpartisan primaries and then ranked choice voting, so that the incentives are aligned better to encourage candidates who will appeal to a broader swath of the electorate and not just to the most right or the most left fringe. So I'm interested in those things. I'm open to the idea of a new party, assuming that it starts at the grassroots and works its way up. But in the meantime, the nature of the Republican Party, and I say this as somebody who was a member of the Republican Party, as you know, for decades, this party has to be, it has to be defeated. It has to suffer serious defeats so that it engages in some self-reflection and reform, because as it exists right now, it is a threat to the Republic.
Yeah. Well, again, to come full circle as we draw to a close, when you have a movement that is nihilistic, go for broke nihilism, as I call it, ideologically based on nothing because they're following a cult leader. But when you have a movement that only sort of exists to own the libs or blame the other. When I say the other, I don't even mean it in a racial sense, so that's part of it. It's just sort of it's an opposition to whatever they are. So if Biden says that he and Jesus are having a meeting, well, then Jesus is a communist, obviously. It's so preposterous to think, you know what I mean? And JFK Jr., according to QAnon, is coming back to Dealey Plaza. I mean, you can't have a conversation. So you're right. It has to be completely defeated for there to be a serious group of ideas that, by the way, aren't looking only inward, but once again, toward the sun.
Yes.
And that's our only shot. Well, Mona, you've always looked toward the sun. You still are at the Bulwark. I for those that don't know, she's editor-in-chief at the Bulwark, which I love.
Not editor-in-chief. I'm a policy editor at the Bulwark. And
policy editor at the Bulwark.
Yes, I'm policy editor at the Bulwark and a syndicated columnist, and I contribute here and there to the BBC and Time Magazine and various other things.
I want to have you back talk about your multiple books. We didn't even have a chance to talk about those.
I would love to come back.
And we'll do it. And I really appreciate our wide-ranging conversation,
Me too. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. So folks, this is Mona Charen here from the Bulwark. And Mona, where can people find you on Twitter?
Yeah. So it's at Mona Charen. So that's easy on Twitter/X.
Yep.
And then just go to the Bulwark and bulwark.com and you'll see my work. And my podcasts are Beg to Differ, which is available both on all the podcast apps as well as YouTube now. We've gone video after years of doing it audio only. So now we're on YouTube. And then for subscribers to the Bulwark, there's another podcast that I do once a week with my colleagues called Just Between Us.
Oh, I don't know about that one. Okay, great. Yeah. All right. Well, we all better listen. We're so happy to have had you here. Dirty Moderates, let's thank Mona Charen. And in the meantime, stay dirty, stay moderate, and stay safe. Mona, don't go anywhere. We'll see you on the other side.